Welcome inside Studio A. I'm Maria Trivelpeice alongside Kyle Youmans. Kyle, the regular season of the American Football Conference has come to a close. The championship matchup is set. It is Army. It is Tulane. At the beginning of the year, if you saw these two teams in that title game, is it something you would have expected or didn't expect at all?
You know, I think when it boils down to it, these have been the two best teams in the conference all year long. So, yes, I could expect it. Now, there are some other great teams. I think Memphis is another great team. UTSA, if they would have gotten off to a better start, they're a great team as well. But the fact that you've got two teams that were in the top 5 of your preseason poll, newcomer Army working their way into the fold early and often, yeah, this is going to be an incredible matchup. Physicality, all sorts of play, back and forth, talent across the board, and the eyes of the nation are upon the American Athletic Conference. Cannot wait to preview this one.
That was so dramatic how you said that. The eyes of the nation, especially with Army in the game. I think that's something that we definitely have to take note of. As you said, 2 of the top 5 teams in this championship game. I think the one thing that really stood out to me and that excites me the most is the fact that Army, first year in the American Conference, and they make it to the championship game. I think it says a lot about that program.
Yeah, I think that's what's exciting about it is you see the way that these two teams have made it. And they come from different backgrounds. They come from a new coaching staff in Tulane and an experienced coaching staff and a tenured coaching staff with Army. And they come from Tulane, who's been in the American Conference Championship back-to-back years, where the Army Black Knights have not even been in the conference in back-to-back years. It's their first year in the conference. So completely different backgrounds, but you look at the way that they've made it, the way that they've gotten to this title game. They did it with dominant defense, and they did it with a great rushing attack on both sides. Both teams have done that. Army does it, Tulane does it, and it proves that even in this modern day and age of college football where you love the air raid, you love to throw the football around, and it's all about the quarterbacks, both teams have great quarterbacks. Don't get me wrong. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yep.
But it's ground and pound and great defense. I love it. It's old school football, and it's more American than you can even think about.
Well, I just think the toughness is what this is going to come down to, and both teams just pride themselves on how tough they are. You mentioned just the coaching staffs, though, as well. Tulane, new coach, same result. So I think, what do you think that says about Tulane just as a school, as a program, the way that they can continuously win despite making a coaching change this year?
Well, it's hard to keep success rolling like this, back to back to back. And it's even more so impressive to do it with different staffs. I mean, look at what Alabama's dealing with Kalen DeBoer right now. That's an Alabama team that had the best setup you possibly could ever ask for. Nick Saban left Alabama with it riding high and every piece of resource that you could possibly get to. They haven't had the same level of success from one coach to another. A coach that was in the national championship game the year prior. They go from the best situation to one of the best coaches, and they still don't win the same. So the fact that John Summerall has worked into the fold at Tulane the way that he has, not only missing a beat, but arguably being better than it was after going to the championship game back-to-back years and doing it for a third straight year, that is unbelievable to talk about. And I think that his entire staff deserves the credit. I think the athletic department at Tulane deserves the credit. And the players deserve the credit as well, because there's a lot of guys that have stuck around from the early years to continue into Tulane's success. This is a fun football team to watch, and it's a coaching staff that has allowed that to be so.
Let's talk about some of those players. And we can't talk about players on Tulane without bringing up Makhi Hughes, somebody that you have been singing the praises of from the beginning. Talk about running offenses in the way it's a pound offense. You can't do that without Makhi Hughes. He's one of the strongest rushers that we've seen. He's been incredible.
Best running back in the conference. Best one in the conference. He's a top 5 running back in the country as well. Actually, if you want to challenge me on that, go to Pro Football Focus. They'll agree with me. PFF has him as the 4th highest graded halfback in the country behind guys like Ashton Jeanty. Oh, you might have heard of him. He's a Heisman Trophy contender. Jeremiah Love from Notre Dame. Oh, by the way, he's possibly going to the college football playoff. And then Brashard Smith from SMU, also in that running all the way up into the final week of the regular season. So, you've got those 3 guys are the only 3 above Makhi Hughes. Only 3 that have been there. I think you look at him as the straw that stirs the green wave drink, and he is the X factor for whether or not they will lift the American Athletic Conference trophy again. He is a great runner. He stays behind his pads. He has some lateral ability, and he has the acceleration that is NFL caliber. I talked about all of this all the way back to week 2 of All-American. I was talking about Makhi Hughes. He was going to give an opportunity for Tulane to beat Kansas State. They didn't do so. They were in that game till the very end. He was going to give an opportunity against Oklahoma. They didn't beat Oklahoma, but he did run for over 100 yards in that game. He is a game changer, and I think if they're going to win a conference title, Makhi Hughes is the one that's going to get the job done.
And I think another factor to look at is just the way that John Summerall speaks of Makhi Hughes as well. So many times in his press conferences, the remaining message or the continuing message that he always says is his ability to run defenses down and wear them down. And you see that every single week that he steps onto the field. Even if he doesn't get it right off that first drive, the first couple of drives, the more that he runs, he just makes people tired because of his strength and his ability and his speed. And so I think he has been such a crucial part. He has been such a crucial part to the Green Wave's success. Now, another player who's certainly contributed to that as well that we maybe didn't think at the beginning of the season would have the impact that he has is Darian Mensah.
I love the fact that Mensah has done what he's needed to do to take over this football team. And to be completely honest, they've had great quarterback play over the last few years. Michael Pratt was one of the best quarterbacks that this conference has seen ever. And the fact that you had to replace that with a redshirt or a true freshman, a guy that's going to come in and be in his first year of college football, I think it speaks to the coaching staff in the way that they trusted him early, got him the necessary snaps to have some success in the early going, and then, of course, the way that he's responded in a big way. This is a team that rallies around Mensah as a whole, and I think that's something that he is a redshirt freshman, by the way, so he did have an extra year in front of it. But I think they do rally around him in order to get that offense off the ground and push them to the next level.
Yeah, we've seen it play out in multiple occasions, and not only rallying on the offensive side, I think the defense plays off of that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the defense as on its own, though, is so incredible. I don't think that there's enough that we can say about the Tulane defense.
It's complementary football at its finest. It's the defense setting up the offense to play better and better as it goes along. And I think you look at Darian Mensah as a whole, as a redshirt freshman, they don't ask him to do too much. They don't ask him to run like crazy. I mean, his actual career high in rushing was the 57 yards that he had against Navy late in the season when they won 35-0 in that matchup. He threw only 14 passes in that game. 138 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's only had the 4 interceptions this year. If you go week by week, the only other games that he's really had to throw the football a ton in was South Florida and Kansas State. And those are the only 2 300-plus yard games that he's needed in his redshirt freshman year. So when you've got a quarterback that can manage the game, because there's talent around him, there's talent on the skills positions, there's talent in running back, there's talent in the trenches as well. This offensive line's really good. They're going to be tested against the defensive line of Army this week. However, all of those missing pieces, and then you throw a defense that's elite on that side of the football in as well, it's a complete game changer, and you're able to have some success like Tulane has had this year.
Yeah, I love watching Darian Mensah, and I think it's also takes some of that pressure off him as well when your defense is that good.
Oh, yeah.
You have those other offensive pieces, and I think that allows him, like you said, they don't have to do too much. He can just do everything that he needs to.
Yeah.
And coast is not the word I'm looking for, but just, make the plays that are necessary of him.
Well, and they take the football away too, and they give him extra opportunities. That's the thing is, anytime you have a team that's plus 13 in the turnover margin going into the final week of the regular season, then you've got a ton of success around them. And I think you saw that in games like North Texas. The defense didn't play very well. That's why Darian Mensah struggled at times. You saw it in the opposite way with Charlotte, Temple, Navy, where they held their opponent underneath 6 points in each of those games. The offense was able to play on their own accord and able to have their own momentum. So, yes, I do think that it all kind of comes together, and it's predicated off a great defense and a great rushing attack.
Speaking of great rushing attack, Army has one of those as well. But I want to talk a little bit more just about in-conference play with the way that Tulane has been and the way that Army has been just within the American Athletic Conference. Because we talked about some of the things that happened outside of it, the losses outside of it. But within conference play, both of those teams have been so dominant.
Dominant. You look at the offense from Tulane, and we talk about the run game, but they don't get the credit for the quick strike ability as much as they probably should. They had quick strike ability all season long, all the way through. You saw it against South Florida and UAB and early in the season. And you saw it against North Texas and Charlotte and Temple and Memphis. You saw it against all these teams along the way. They can strike at a hot pace, very high pace. And so that's an underrated element of this Tulane team that I don't think people give as much credit to.
Yeah, and we just looked at the takeaways as well and how that's been an impact. So it's that quick strike. It's that just making things happen on defense. And we're going to talk about defense as we have to mention the other team in this championship game, and that is the Army Black Knights in their first appearance within the American Athletic Conference, first season in the American Athletic Conference, making an appearance in the championship game.
How impressive is it for Army and Coach Munkin to say, hey, let's just, you know what? We haven't been in a conference in a while. Let's just go ahead and join the American Army, American. It all kind of runs together. It just makes sense, right?
Makes a lot of sense.
And then you work in here and you say, you know what? We're not gonna pitter-patter. We're not going to need an adjustment period. You picked us to finish 5th in the preseason poll. All right, we see you.
Bet.
And then you rattle off an undefeated start to the season. You wrap up a spot in the title game with weeks left to play, and you continue to just dominate week in, week out. A lot of this is Bryson Daly. And I don't think people really understood the type of impact that Bryson Daly was going to have on this team until the midway point of the season. My goodness, he's been electric. The way that he has dominated. And of course, they're going to run the football effectively. But in terms of air attack and that extra element of their offense, striking on the first drive of the game, they did so all the way through the first 8 games of the season.
That stat was insane. Like every week I was like, are they going to score on the first drive? They did.
They did.
And you're like, when's this going to stop?
And a lot of it was through the air too.
Yeah.
And they found a way to put together that statistic. I think the stats, if you were to look at average per run, the rush attempts are great. You're going to just go ground and pound, 4 yards in a cloud of dust. That's going to move the chains. But then you've got the passing attack where it's more so like 15, 20, 30 yards, and then all these touchdowns on the top of just a couple of pass attempts throughout. That is efficiency, and it keeps defenses honest, and it keeps them dynamic on the offensive side of the football. Wasn't perfect down the stretch. I thought they kind of pitter-pattered where they probably shouldn't as the season went on, but that was the spark that you needed going into it. And I think the offense was really fun to watch.
And I think even when you mentioned that pitter-pattering, they still found ways to win football games, right?
Yeah.
They had the loss against Notre Dame, and that was kind of like an outlier there. But I just think that they found ways, even when things weren't as clean or as efficient as they would have liked, to win. And I think a big reason for that is because their defense kept them in games. If we talk about the Tulane defense, the Army defense, one and the same, in that they just are able to stifle offenses. And I think it comes down to the toughness of the Army Black Knights. And I think that's something that's like very understated, or maybe it's overstated. Like, oh, it's an academy. There's going to be toughness. But I was watching a press conference, I think it was 2 weeks ago at this point, with Jeff Munkin, and somebody asked him why he didn't take Bryson Daly out in those last couple of drives against Notre Dame when the game was kind of out of hand. And he said, look, all of these student athletes, or cadet athletes as they're called at the academy, are going to serve in the military at one point. Mm-hmm. There's no option to just
sub out.
It doesn't
when
happen.
When things aren't going your way.
Yes. And he said that if they're going to live that in their lives off the field, they need to be able to do that on the field as well. He's like, it's never an option for Bryson Daly to just sub out and take a couple plays off. And I was like,
love that.
When we watched this championship football game, oh man, like that, him saying that made me want to run through a brick wall. And I was like, man. And it also just goes to show like what these athletes are doing both at Army and Navy, not only while they're here in the American, but when they go on and the careers that they have after. And it's just a different type of toughness, and Tulane's very tough as well. So how are those different levels of toughness going to play out on this football field?
No, I love the way you put that. And I think it goes back to Army on the football field has not had to deal with a ton of adversity. I mean, they've had injuries just like any football team. They've had plenty of things go poorly, and they've had to turn things around in terms of the game itself. But ever since their win over a ranked Air Force last year, where they were 2-6 entering that game, they won 13 straight going into the Notre Dame game and had already locked up a spot in the American title game. They didn't see a ton of X's and O's adversity because they were so dominant on both sides of the ball. They were so physical. They were so tough. The defense was flying. The Bryson Dailies and Udos of the world were flying too. They have so much success that I think that was a coaching point that Monken had to make when things didn't go their way for the first time in 2024, and you were down big at Yankee Stadium on national television, and you could take your star quarterback out. It's not the case. They're going to have tough matchups along the way, one being this week in a title game against Tulane. This will not be an Army runaway sort of victory. This is going to be a dogfight all the way top to bottom. And I think that just serves the purpose of saying there's no quit here. There's no element to quit, and you've got to play better if you're Bryson Daly, just like he has all year long. Then they trust him to do so.
And I think one thing, too, is I would even wonder if Bryson Daly would want to come out of the game at that point, because I just think the way that we've seen him play.
Doubt it.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever even a question. I think it was an interesting question posed by the person that asked it in the press conference, and it was a valid question. But I just think that knowing Bryson Daly and knowing what Army stands for, I wonder if that was even a question for them.
Well, and you also got to look at this offense hasn't been flying on all cylinders since he was banged up against ECU. I mean, the Army offense, just 20 points against Air Force. Air Force going into that game wasn't playing crazy good defense. They had the 14 points against North Texas, one of the worst defenses statistically in the country, and then they only had the 14 points against Notre Dame, one of the better defenses statistically in the country. So it was kind of a mixed bag of things going into the last couple of games for Army. So if you feel like you haven't seen the full Army Black Knight attack, then you're probably right. You haven't seen it over the last few weeks. If you think they're going to lay down against this Tulane defense because how good they are on that side of football, you might be mistaken there too. I think they still have something left in the tank, and you're going to see that in the title game coming up this week.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think if there's any time for the Army offense to turn itself back on, this is it. One thing I will say, besides that loss to Notre Dame, overall the Army defense has been showing up
really
even
good.
in those that has just been the consistent. I mean, Bryson Daly's very consistent, right? But he did get a little banged up, and that's where things changed. But very few times have you been able to nitpick at that Army defense.
Yeah, and you start to see the chink in the Black Knight's armor, pun completely intended there. When it was 49 points against Notre Dame. That's the first time you kind of saw the chink in the armor. Whether that travels into the postseason as well, we'll see. However, you can count on one hand how many times that Army has allowed multiple touchdowns to an opponent, and you could still have fingers left over on that one hand because they don't do it a whole lot. They really don't. They are an elite defense, just like Tulane. And that's what I think is so intriguing about this matchup is the fact that you have the top two defenses in the conference in terms of skill, film, assignment, alignment, the ability to track down and tackle. I mean, just the fundamentals of tackling. Tulane and Army are the best two at doing so. And that's what's going to be the difference is who lets up even in the slightest. And I think it's going to be a wild ending to this one just because you don't anticipate those two having any sort of lapse on defense, yet something's got to give.
Something has to give eventually. And you talk about the similarities, right? But there's so many things that are so similar about each of these opponents. And that's why I think when I was thinking about, all right, what are the keys for each of these teams to win? I'm like, I have to really think about it. No, I think I'll let you go first, but I think we have very similar keys in what does Army have to do and what does Tulane have to do.
So for Tulane, you got to be more physical than Army. You kind of got to beat them at their own game because Army is, at least going into the year, they were the most physical team in the American. We kind of outlined it that way from the get-go. Army has the physicality. Tulane has the speed. So those two very fundamental elements of football are 1 and 1. So if Tulane, which I think Tulane has a better opportunity of keeping up with the physicality of Army, then Army has to keep up with the speed of Tulane, because speed just doesn't go away or appear out of nowhere. But physicality is a mindset a lot of the time. So I think Tulane has a chance to take the advantage in both of those categories. That's the key. You got to be more physical. You're going to be faster than Army, plain and simple. Discipline, Army's got that all the way through. But in terms of physicality, Tulane can match it. Now, what do you think in terms of the Tulane Green Wave?
See, I'm with you on that. I think that the physicality part is huge, right? But I also think I want to see them not allow the Army defense to stop Makhi Hughes, because you know that that's who they're going to key in on. So can Makhi Hughes still generate offense, knowing that he's going to be the target of that Army defense? And so I think that's just furthering that physicality point a little bit more than what you said. But I think when you look at the stat sheet, and we'll take a look at it in a little bit, but these teams are very similar. I think that's that one small difference is which player on each team that the opponent is keying in on, can they get going and beat that game plan? I don't know if I explained that as well.
No, 100%.
Yeah.
You had it because you're talking about establishing the run.
Right.
And Army can't allow for Tulane to establish the run. So I'm right there with you.
Right.
That's the key for Army. On the opposite side, they cannot allow Makhi Hughes to do Makhi Hughes things and for Tulane to control the line of scrimmage with that physicality up front. So it all kind of plays into factor, and time of possession is going to be crucial in this game. And the fact that these two teams are the tops in not only the conference, but the nation in terms of time of possession speaks wonders as to how they got here.
Well, I think even when I was watching that Notre Dame game that Army lost, I was like, they're still playing their game, right?
Yeah.
They were having the ball for long periods of time. They were having those long drives, and I think that says a lot about the way this game maybe will end up with one touchdown apiece, or maybe it'll be 3-0. I don't know. Maybe somebody will kick a field goal, because these teams do such a good job of controlling the football and keeping themselves on offense. And so I'm really intrigued, and I think it goes back to your point of physicality and who's going to outmuscle the other one to get that ball back.
Well, and I also think Army and Tulane are going to have to do something out of their game plan, or out of their identity. Let's say it that way, out of their identity. Army's going to have to throw the football effectively again. Yeah. And they've been doing that throughout the year, but they're going to have to do so against one of the top defenses in terms of coverage and takeaways in Tulane often. They're going to have to do so maybe more often than they had previously, because they can't just run the ball over and over against that 7-man front from Tulane that is super good at slowing down the run.
Right.
You've got to have some level of passing attack. Not just the 79 yards per game that you had. You got to continue moving forward and moving the ball down the field and have some level of threat through the air to keep Tulane off balance if they're going to have to do it. Tulane on the opposite side, they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit more as well, because, again, Army's been great at stopping the run, just like Tulane has been. So both of these teams are going to have to try and establish the ground game and the physicality. We're talking about that all the way through, but they're also going to have to find a way to get the air game going too.
Well, I think as we look at both of these graphics and these stats, we say one thing for one team and then we say pretty much the exact same thing for the other, because everything is so similar. You talk about Army, you need to throw the football a little bit more. Well, so does Tulane.
Yep.
You know what the strengths of each of these offenses are, and you know that both of these teams have really good defenses who know how to, shut down the best part of the opposing team's offense. And so it's just that game plan, and I think a lot of it too is going to be preparation, right? But I think it's going to be preparation of the coaching staffs to have other options if, like, your number one offensive option goes down. And I also think, not goes down, but is stopped by the opposing team. So I think that a lot of this success is going to come from in-game adjustments. So I think a lot of this is going to come down to not only the physicality of the players, but the intelligence and the game planning of the coaching staffs, because these are two so evenly matched teams with very similar statistics. So how can you outsmart the opponent that you're playing?
You got to have an advantage somewhere, right?
Yeah,
you got to have
it has
some
to give somewhere
level of step up, because when you look at and also the amount of time going into the game too plays a factor. These two teams have known for weeks now that they were going to see each other in the title game.
For sure.
So it was a part of the game plan all the way through. Army has, of course, the game looming after this one in terms of Navy and what that's going to do, whereas Tulane has a postseason berth waiting for them after this game, but it all kind of boils down to this first. So you're right. I think the game plan is going to be well in place. Both teams are going to do everything they can to stick to the script early, but that script is going to very quickly on Friday night be ripped up, thrown out of the building, and whoever adjusts better is going to have the win. That's what it's going to come down to.
And that's my favorite part of not just football, but sports in general, is it's all about adjustments. And I think that people in life, in football, in any sport that you play, the faster that you adjust, the better that you get. Like I'm even thinking back to my own experience. Like if I strike out on a rise ball like 3 at bats in a row, that's ridiculous. Like please,
we're going back to softball.
Yeah,
baby.
Sorry, I always have the softball reference, but like you have to be able to make an adjustment. And I think these two programs, that's why they're in this championship game, right? Yep. Because they have coaching staffs and they have players that can adjust really quickly. I mean, just even in-game adjustments of like reacting to different openings, or just the fact that Bryson Daly's going to hurdle somebody, or he's going to do a spin move.
He's going to
do something crazy that's going to make it on top plays. And so I want to see adjustments in this championship matchup. And that's ultimately my biggest key, is who adjusts the most efficiently. That's who's going to win. It sounds super vague, but when you look at the stats, it's really hard to break down anything like technically because they're so similar.
Yeah, they are. And that's why they were the best two teams in the conference. That's why. Plain and simple. And that's why we're going to see them in the title game coming up on Friday night.
Who wins?
Oh, this is tough. And I feel like I've gone back and forth on this throughout the last couple of weeks, but you know what? I've made my decision.
You're making a decision?
Yeah, and I'm going to.
Are you going rogue?
I am totally going rogue.
Kyle, I've been working with you for too many weeks that I'm not even surprised by this. I'm not even going to look at the helmet that you pick. I'm keeping my eyes. Oh, you have both of them? I thought you were going to take one off the wall and come sit down.
I got to get my mic back first. Here's the thing. I've got both helmets here.
Are they going to fit on your head, though?
I don't know. I've never tried this before. We're kind of going right off the wall here. Both of these teams are very. I am.
He
both
thinks
of
that
these
he's Lee
teams
Corso.
are very. I am not Lee Corso. Very, very deserving to be here. But there's only one team that I think has the ability to keep what they've been doing all season long: the discipline, the skill, the toughness, and the mentality. And I think it's the team that's been here before. And I think it's the Tulane Green Wave. It does fit on my head. How about that?
I am more surprised that you put the helmet on. Wow. I'm really.
There you go. It doesn't even like
it's a little crooked.
Perfectly. It is a little
I think you're missing like a pad in that other
totally
ear.
Totally a pad missing.
Yeah,
maybe that's how
looks
my
a little crooked. Kyle, did you play football?
A long time ago.
Okay.
Yeah, long time
yeah,
ago.
I hope your actual helmet
fits
you
a little bit better than this one.
You're going with Tulane. Why?
I'm going to Tulane because I think defense as a whole is deeper. I think, and I think it's going to be easier for them to have success slowing down the rushing attack than the vice versa side of things. And Army is a little banged up more so than I think we give credit for. Tulane has had the ability to play very disciplined football all year long. They've been battle tested through Oklahoma, through Kansas State, through Memphis, and all these other teams that they've faced throughout the season, whereas Army, for the most part, avoided a lot of the heavy hitters in the American, and the only real tough matchup they've had to this point in the season, they'll have another one next week against Navy, but the only real tough competition they had was Notre Dame, and that turned into the 49-14 game that they had. So I think it's Tulane that gets the job done. I thought they were the better team coming into the year. I think they'll be the better team at the end of the year, just like it was at the beginning as well.
What do you think, going off of that, if Tulane wins and then if Army wins? I want to hear your thoughts about what a victory could mean for each side, because I think it's different for each of them.
Yeah, it is. It is different. I think, and the notes that I have here is Army has done it the old-fashioned way. They've done it by putting their program on the map in an NIL and a transfer portal era. Jeff Monken deserves all the credit in the world to get to this point and to prove that there are other ways to win than just throwing money at players and throwing all these recruiting elements at players. They win it because going to Army is a good thing for your life moving forward, and it's a good way to set you up for the entirety of your time here. So I think it does. It plays a factor for Army early on. For Tulane, you still got a shot at every goal you've set in front of you. You want to have success in the regular season? Check. You want to have success in the postseason? Check. Win a conference title? Check. But after that, you have a lot on the table in front of you as well. So I think that is what it means to it all the way through. And it should be a fun thing for both of us to watch whenever this game comes around on Friday.
I cannot wait. I think you really hit the nail on the head there, just the way that you described like what it means for Army, what it means for Tulane. And I think
both could be program-changing wins.
I think no matter what, it becomes a program-changing win for either team. And I think no matter which team wins or loses, I think these are program-changing seasons for each of them, because I think Army joining a conference for the first time in a bit, I think the fact that they are in a championship game and have had so much success early on is huge, especially after they haven't had the success that they've wanted in the past couple of years. And then on the Tulane side, just it's establishing a program, right? You have a brand new head coach, but you're still able to win. So that says a lot, not just about John Summerall, right? But that says a lot about Tulane football. And I think that these seasons for both of these teams are something, regardless of what happens on Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern time on ABC. Both of these programs should be proud of what they've accomplished already. I'm not picking anyone yet.
You don't have to pick them, but you want to put on the helmet?
Put on the helmet?
Yeah, why not? Put on the helmet at the end of this. I'll put on the Tulane one. We'll
but I don't want any fans getting upset.
That's fair.
I'm not picking anyone yet. I hope both teams have fun.
This is going to be fun. Tulane, Army, like she said, 8 p.m. Eastern time on ABC. Friday night lights mean a whole new mentality whenever you've got these two teams coming together in the American Athletic Conference Championship. We'll be back next week to break it all down for you, what happens, plus we'll preview Army and Navy next week as well. Have fun, everybody. Enjoy the game. Enjoy the final conference championship week of college football this year. This is going to be a whole lot of fun. For Maria Trivelpeice and our entire American crew, I'm Kyle Youmans saying so long from Studio A. We'll see you after Tulane and Army next week.